like no. And this,
okay.
yeah.
I'm going to start off time kind of back. All right. So, good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is First Linton. I am the chairman of the Citizens for Advanced Management and Prosperity, the vote Yes For Mattoon ballot referendum. In a couple of weeks, you're going to be asked to vote, and on the last question of the ballot will be a question: should the city adopt a city manager form of government? We're going to talk about that tonight. Couple of things. So we're going to change the form up a little bit tonight. We've got a couple of professionals here to present to you. We have an opportunity to learn all kinds of things about a city manager type of government. These guys are the answer to that. First, I want to acknowledge both of them. We have two presenters, one from the Illinois City County Management Association, the International City Council Management Association, Mr. Steve Carter, and the senior advisor for the ILCMA and the ICMA, Mr. Jason Grant, Director of Advocacy for the ICMA, here with us. Thank you both for taking the time to come down.
Absolutely.
One of these guys flew in from DC just to be here with you. Wow. For those of you who don't know, we put the referendum on the ballot. We talked about that a little bit. We've heard from many of the Mattoon residents and had lots of questions asked. And quite honestly, we're getting a lot of positive feedback now, so I'm happy about that. We've struggled to keep pace in our town, mostly with infrastructure and growth, to keep up with what's happening in our community. If you look around Illinois and see what we have compared to what else is happening in Illinois, I think we've got a lot of good things going on. We feel like it's time to upgrade our city management to try to stay ahead of that curve and do some long-term planning, and these guys are here to talk about that. Our goal isn't just to advocate for change, to empower the voter to make the best decision, and that's why we have these guys here. Before I turn it over, I want you to understand we want to keep it casual. If you have questions, even during their presentation, stop, raise your hands, and we'll try to answer questions. At the end, I'll do a little bit of a wrap-up if you have questions for me, so once we get through this, hopefully you have most of that answered. If not, we'll stay up here as long as you need us to be, and hang around after to ask questions if you have them. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to these guys.
Yeah, good. So good to be here. Again, I'm Jason Grant with ICMA, the International City County Management Association. And one of the things that comes up a lot for us, I go around and I go to different places to talk about form of government. Exciting stuff, right? So all the reasons that people change form of government, what's behind it, why does it happen? My research is in that area of why do people choose certain forms of government? What are the arguments when they're thinking about changing form of government? So we'll get into a whole bunch of different things here. Stop us, ask us what's going on. Steve can fill you in a lot more local in Illinois, what it's like, what happens. So we've got a lot of stuff that we were asked to kind of talk about broadly that please don't just sit here and have us go through the presentation though, right? Like things that are important, things you want to stop and home in on a little bit, let's do that. Cool? So as we go through, biggest thing we talk about when we talk about form of government is it a localized solution to public problems, right? So government generally exists to be hey, we got problems as a public, we need to address these problems in some capacities. At the local level, what's really the issues where we live? And that changes from place to place. The other thing of what does good government looks like is going to be different from place to place. So at the end of the day, you have to look at and say, what do I expect out of government? What do I want my government to do for us as a community? And what seems to be the most reasonable way that we can make certain government addresses the types of issues that we're facing? Right? So, and that's everything that occurs when we start talking about local government. There's not a good, bad, right, or wrong. There is research that shows which ones perform better for specific outcomes that you might be looking at. One of the things to keep in mind, and this is why Steve's really helpful, is when you look across, we only have two levels of government in our federalist system, federal and state. There is no local in our Constitution. Local governments are set up by the state. So your state code, your state constitution says this is what local governments you can do and how they have to look. So when you go across any state, it could be completely different of what their state codes and constitutions look like. So just be aware, you might think of what's happening in one state a certain way. You may or may not be able to structure in that exact same way, or what that code language, how you go about structuring it can differ, right? So there's always this issue of difference in each of them. But regardless of where you are, this is what local government is. There is no uniform structure. Because it isn't there, each city, particularly if you have city charters in places and you look at how it's structured, You can look across one city, will have a totally different form of local government than another city. It operates completely different. In Illinois, you have a lot of different forms of government structures. Townships are set up different than towns, and villages and cities and counties then become different on that. All of that starts to take place. So you're not going to find a uniform structure even within the states, let alone from state to state. There's generally a high degree of professionalism in local government that's desired, right? Like, we have very specific things we're trying to figure out, like what's our roads, what's our school, what's our infrastructure, do we have our public utilities, right? Well, is our streets safe? There's specific things we know we want from our government and our permitting processes there that always have to happen. So usually you want people who know what the heck they're talking about and have done at that level, and people in the jobs of local government usually have some level of training or skills or knowledge or certifications or background to carry out those specific jobs. As you move to state and federal, it becomes much more political in terms of how we manage those, and so you may not have the same degree of professionalism at all levels the higher up that you go. Local governments are going to respond to immediate needs far more than 5-10 years down the road, right? So if we talk about the economy, nothing we do today is going to change the economy tomorrow, but we can change our roads tomorrow. We can start work on a park tomorrow, right? There's things we can do, much more immediate time frame that we look at. And then the other thing is to remember that a locality is always a child of the state. The state gets to determine what kind of rights and abilities that local governments have, so there's always this balance. States can sometimes impose their will upon the local governments, and sometimes they can also structure what it is we're allowed to do or not in local governments. So that can sometimes play into there. Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything specific with Illinois and local governance?
Well, you know, Illinois is famous because we have more local governments than any other state in the country. And so not just the ones that Jason mentioned, but you have drainage districts and every kind of district you can think of in the counties. And we have 102 counties, and you figure 102 times all of the different types of local governments we have a lot. But you know, even with cities and counties, what we're most familiar with, you know, we have mostly mayor council. We have a lot of council manager cities, and then about 40-some commission form, I think, in terms of cities, municipalities as well. And that's what we really want to focus on as much as we can today, is look at the municipalities.
So, fun timeline. If you really want to get to it, they have the presentation. You want to get into all this, you can. Lots of different forms of government. Basically what happened in the U.S., you started out with direct democracy. People went to the church. They said, what are the things that we want here in our town? They all vote. Yes, this is what we want. And they all went back home. And then a few people would carry that out. We want a sheriff. We want a library. We want some sort of roadway through here, whatever, right? But then they started to grow and started to be like, hey, there's way too many people. We can't all fit into this church and vote and get along, and we can't get everyone to show up because people are working. So they come up with this representative town hall, which is Republican structured, like, you go represent me at town meeting, right? Those are predominantly in New England. You have a few of these that are structured similar to this in Illinois. Some Midwest cities have models of this. But basically what you saw happen was this mayor council. They said, well, gee, at the federal and state level, we got this separation. You got a president, you got a Senate and Congress, and we have a governor, and we've got a general assembly. Let's just kind of mirror that. We'll have a mayor and we'll have a council, right? And so there's sort of this structure which comes from European models. But then you saw a whole lot of corruption start to occur, right? Like all of a sudden the parties could control who gets there, who gets what in the community. And so how do we combat this corruption that seems to be occurring, that the political elite are controlling everything and running things, and we, the people, aren't getting a whole lot of services out of there. And it's hard to make things actually start to occur. You have a huge hurricane down in Texas, and then all of a sudden they said, let's set up what you guys have, a commission form. Let's not have separate powers. Let's bring those powers together, the executive and the legislative together, and we can get stuff done really quickly. If there's a problem, we don't need to debate it. We don't need to go through any channels. We can just control these departments. And so you had a commissioner who would oversee certain bureaus or departments, and they can make things happen really quickly. And they said, oh my gosh, we are so segmented regimented and everyone has their little fiefdoms. We didn't really get rid of any of the corruption type of issues we were concerned about, and we're not efficient in how we get things done anymore. There's this thing in Staunton, Virginia, where they hired a manager kind of like running a business, and they said, we still have the executive powers and the legislative powers in one body of the commission, but they're going to hire a CEO to make sure government is running and programs and services are delivered. And if they don't, we're going to fire that person, we're going to hire someone who knows what the heck they're doing, and we're going to hold them accountable. So we still maintain all the power as a commission of the executive and the legislative functions, but we have someone who's tasked to be able to run the daily operation of the government. And that's when they sort of came up with this council manager structure, right? And now you have hybrids around this all the way. But in a very brief timeline, we go from direct democracy to a representative democracy to making sure we have professional management. People know what the heck they're doing in terms of running a government and hold someone accountable to running it efficiently on a daily basis. That's the shift that you see there. As opposed to waiting every 4 years for a mayor to get elected, or trying to figure out, well, this commissioner is doing a good job with these services, but these services here aren't very good, and that commissioner doesn't have that run. And gee, why are we duplicating these efforts in these different departments? Like, we need to have more unified structure in government. That's sort of how that came about. So more operating like a business as opposed to a political entity. I'm going to pause on that. Does that fair enough, easy enough overview, feel comfortable? This is where, when we look at commission of where we come out of, where executive and legislative powers rest with the elected body, that's not changing in a council manager structure. What changes is, instead of them trying to figure out and manage the administration on top of doing constituent services, on top of running elections and all of that, they're saying we as a collective body are going to hire somebody and hold them accountable to make sure that this government is run effectively to reach the goals that we establish, right? So they work for the board. They don't have their own powers as a manager. So what does form of government look like today? After all these changes and all these things that happened, this is how it's mostly structured here today in the U.S. Council manager is the most common form of local government in the U.S. This is across the U.S. at 48%. Second is mayor-council at 38%. Commission with 3%. So you're in a very small minority of people who say we want to maintain commission form. That exists. Town meeting at 8% and representative town meeting at 2%. Again, those are primarily New England cities that those operated. So currently you are in the second least common form of government in the U.S. And we say, well, what does it look like for cities of 10 to 25,000, right, in our population base here? And you look at nationwide, council manager is 52%, and commission is 5%. So even at this size, commission generally tends towards smaller cities. But even there, you're at 5%. And in Illinois, 42% are council manager and only 1% is commission, out of the data and research that we have of what exists. And again, there may be some other small little towns and cities that are out there that may not be incorporated in this. Trying to track all those forms sometimes can be difficult. Does that ring true for what your experience is there?
I think that's really true. As you take a look at Illinois, we have maybe 1,000 municipalities in the state. And the size varies considerably, obviously. And if you take a look at the makeup of the different forms, commission form is popular for small communities. And if you think about it, it just makes sense. If you're in a town of 500 people, if you get elected to the city commission, well, you're probably mowing the grass in the park on the weekends because they don't have any resources. And so if you get elected to the commission, why, you're a volunteer in the community. But as the population rises, then you see people, it gets more complicated, and you see communities looking for, well, we need more people, and we need technical expertise in order to do the job for our community. And so once you start getting a higher population, then you see more and more communities going to council manager government. And in Illinois, there's been a slow shift. Dixon switched from commission to council manager form, I think, in 2014. Freeport, then a couple years after that, and then Oregon was the last community to do that just a couple years ago. So there's still, it doesn't happen very often because it's a big deal in communities to make a change like that. So it takes a lot of resources just to think through it and to get everybody educated to have a vote on it. So you don't see changes in form of government that often, but you do see it on a regular basis, even in Illinois.
Yeah, and it is much more common in smaller communities. It's also in Illinois, like I said, townships, the way that townships were established by state code, that was a form of government they had to have when they first started setting those up. So then it's just what we've always known, it's what we've always had. So you'll see a lot more in that way, which is a little different even than at the national level. So one of the things that come up, one of the questions that was asked is, what the heck is the difference between a manager and administrator? Don't we already kind of have this? We have an administrator already, we got a commission already. What's really different? And so this chart here, I know it's not going to be easy to read. I'll kind of just talk through a little bit on it, right? So under council manager form of government where you have a city manager, they are legally required in Illinois to be hired based on professional qualifications without regard to political beliefs. You cannot hire a city manager to say, hey, do you share our political affiliation? Do you support this mayor? Do you support this commission member? You have to hire them, just like any of us get hired in a job. Prove that you have the skills, abilities, and knowledge to do the things that we're being asked of you to do. The administrator is not required to. A good commission would do that, and your administrator may be hired that way. But there's no legal requirement. So the question becomes, what do we want government to do? Are we at a risk if our government, we have a different set of commission that says, you know what, there's a really good political donor, let's give them a really good job to make sure they support me in my political career. Certainly is able, they can do that. Hopefully they've never done that here, and they never would do that here, right? But when you look at what's the form of government that's best for us, how do we preserve and protect what we believe we want government to do, there is the ability to have political appointments at administrator, which you cannot as a manager. As a manager, they assure effective, efficient operation of the entire government organization to achieve council mission goals and objectives. So your council/commission, so that elected body becomes one unified body. They have to deliberate, they have to discuss, and they have to come to what is it that we believe government should be doing? What are the policies we are going to put into place? And what are the goals and outcomes we want for this community? Based on that, the city manager says, okay, if that's what you want, here's how we would go about doing this. Here's how we would recommend funding it. Here's what we would look like. Here's how we're going to move toward those goals. And I got to prove to you I'm achieving those goals. Again, just like all of us doing our job, right? We've got to show that we're doing the job that our boss has asked us to do. In this case, that commission is the boss, and the city manager has to provide recommendations of how they can get there. The administrator, they assure the administration of each department is carried out as directed by the individual commissioner responsible for department oversight. Generally in commission forms, the commissioners they oversee certain departments. Generally, that's how commissions work. And I don't know if that's exactly how you work here, but that's a general structure, right? So if I'm an administrator, and you're responsible for these 3 departments, you're responsible for these 4, you're responsible for these 3, you got to tell me how these 3 run, you got to tell me how these ones run, you got to tell me how these ones run, and I may say, hey, look, we're duplicating efforts over here. And they'll say, I don't care as long as I got my budget, my stuff's running good, because I'm going to get elected based on how well these departments run, so I want all of that services here. I don't want to share any kind of services over there, because if their department runs, how am I going to prove that I'm doing my job right? And so what happens is you have an administrator who doesn't manage all of government as a unified body by necessity, by requirement. They are in a position where they've got each different commissioner telling them what the goals and objectives are, and how do I run these departments, which may not be run completely efficiently, right? So we start to lose efficiencies. We also start to lose that capacity to think about holistically, how are my tax dollars being utilized to manage government, to be able to operate, to provide the programs and services that they're being asked to provide. Administrators get put in a really tough spot when it comes to commissions, whereas a manager says, you all, as a majority, make these decisions, and then my job is to make sure that your goals that you agreed on get carried out, even if I disagree with them, right? So when I work in local government, and I may make a recommendation to the commission and say, here's what I think you might want to do, and they're going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. This is what we're going to do. I'll say, okay, you made the right decision every time, because it's your decision to make, not mine. I got to carry it out now, right? So there's dialogue. The manager and the administrator both will provide feedback to them, but it's what is the direction that comes down? How does the community know, and how does the administrator versus manager know what's being expected of us as a government? Does that make sense? I'm going to pause on that a little bit, because I was told this is part of the big concern or question mark there. Is there any?
Can I hop in for a minute?
Yeah.
So I'm a simple mind. To simplify, our city commissioners get elected every 4 years. Each of those 4 city commissioners and mayor is assigned a department to run. They're a paid part-time city employee managing a department that has a department head and a city administrator over here. City administrator has no legal authority to give direction to department heads. He has to come from the commissioner. So can you see a conflict there? I've got 2 bosses. That's pretty tough to deal with. So that guy doesn't have the authority to make all of those departments work well together. He's working through 5 different bosses. In this form, the city manager, all of those department heads report to that person, and then we have one form. The city council, we still have a mayor and 4 council persons, and they're elected by us, the citizens, to do what we would like them to do and to look in the future for our city, plan for our city, and do long-term planning. Make sense?
I'm sorry, so you're saying that the new form would be the city he'd be administrator or manager?
He would be a manager.
Manager, okay.
The city administrator job goes away.
Okay, that job goes away. So this new city manager, he's responsible, he's looking for synergies, but he answers to the council.
Correct.
He works for the council.
Correct. The council has the authority, Jason already talked about, to hire and fire and give direction to the city manager to do that merit initiative.
2 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Are the commissioners versed and educated in how to be like putting me in charge of the
Love that question.
And that's one. And then number 2, if they get on board and they are all paid accountants, if you will. So they're volunteering, if you will. And do they have benefits? And I look at that from a business perspective. Okay? So if we are paying someone who's not educated in that field, okay, for them, we have to look at financially, what are we spending, what are we doing, would that money there not be better off putting into with someone who is educated in that market? Okay? So I guess that's basically it. And then how do they determine who gets what division in the community? If I get the most votes, am I going to be able to choose where I want to go? Or do they automatically just say this, and they throw it up in there like spaghetti and whatever it lands?
That was about 20 questions.
I know, but it all has to do with their.
So to start, I mean, this is great because this is a conversation I'm going to have with many people. How many of you, if you were elected to one of the council positions, have municipal administration and law and Hefner, you're disqualified. So have that type of qualification to be able to jump into that position, a fire chief, a police department, a street department, a water department, and know what to do and how to do it. How many? How stupid is that? Okay? It's inefficient. Okay? They're getting paid to do that, and they're sticking their nose in the businesses that they should be running. First off, there's a department head that runs that business, and if you ask any of those department heads in Mattoon what their job is every 4 years, what is it? Train a new councilman, a new commissioner. Who's my boss? I'm not a okay?
And they're randomly chosen.
And they are randomly chosen. They're not assigned by what their pedigree is. I will say there is one qualified person on the board today that's running one of those departments. It's probably sanitary. She's a CPA. She's on the finance side. The rest of them probably don't have any expertise in those areas.
Oh, sorry. Is that all of them?
There's not 20 there.
And I can address to the one question of, in terms of benefits, in terms of those are all policy questions that the commission would make that decision, right? Like, so if the commission is paid or not paid, that you make that to a future board. You can't raise your own salary, but you say, you know what, we need to get better candidates. In order to do that, we got to pay some amount of money. They would make that decision. The next election, they're there. That's the power they have, and then the people will be like, yo, you do that, we're not re-electing you, or we are, right? Like that's always a policy decision that a manager nor administrator would make, right? Whatever they decide, the manager then would say, okay, that's the policy that got adopted, here's how that would be funded in the budget. We're going to have to cut something. These are things I would recommend maybe are less relevant based on your goals. And they're like, no, I don't want to cut anything. Then you say, guess what? You get to raise taxes then to pay for that, right? Like those are the policy decisions that council always has the power to make. The manager is there to say, look, if you do this, here's the impact on all of city government. If you do that, here's the potential impact. This is the goal that you laid out, that you said you want to accomplish long term. Here's a strategic plan. Managers are going to do strategic plans. Managers generally, the average is about 6 to 7 years for managers versus 4 years, maybe 8 years for elected, right? Managers are used to spanning those commission, those boards, those councils terms. And so managers are driven long-term goal implications, knowing that they may be out of a job, they may move on, someone else comes in. You need to have those plans documented in place so the city knows where we're going and the people know, yeah, we like this strategic plan you adopted. Now you can hold a commission accountable toward moving toward that. They should be reporting back on that. And a manager can say, look at all the things we did toward the strategic plan that you adopted that, by the way, the people really like because they said this is what they wanted and you got reelected under this. We need to keep moving on that. That's sort of the way that operates.
Let me give you some practical experience at this.
That was going to be my question. In your expertise, to what Mary said, is that why the 15,000 and above, there's very few who use the administrative form because you don't have the, you have to have the qualified person versus versus the ones who aren't qualified.
Yeah, the larger the community, the more professionalism you're going to have in all of your positions, probably. But I was the city administrator in Moline for 6 years. So I worked and that was a mayor council form and not a commission form, but the administrator role and its duties were created by ordinance and could be changed any day by the city council, just like in a commission form. What the administrator ordinance says today, tomorrow could be different. And so I experienced that for 6 years in Moline. Then I was city manager in Champaign for 28 years. So I broke the typical tenure, which is 6 or 7 years probably, and I stayed there for 28. Great community. I had excellent elected officials, and they tolerated me as a city manager for all of those years. So I've had experience in both of those kinds of positions. And to me, this is maybe the most critical issue that gets involved in the election. Administrators can be very political, and I think that's a disadvantage. You could be chosen, many of our mayor council citizens are partisan. So the mayor and the council could choose someone because, they're a good Republican or a good Democrat, regardless of whether or not they had any skills. So administrator form tends to be more political than a manager who, has a code of ethics and, we're precluded from participating directly in the election of your officials. So that's one thing. Secondly is the thing that, the administrator's duties could change overnight. So this particular mayor may have a set of duties for the administrator that's put in an ordinance form. Well, the next mayor may not agree with that, and so he may just ditch the whole ordinance. That happened in Urbana when Laura Pressing got elected. The administrator was out because she wanted to run the city herself. In spite of the fact they had an administrator, it was just terrific. But he was out because she wanted to run things herself. So the fact that it's subject to change at any time is a disadvantage. And how many people want to go to work in a situation where your job description could change tomorrow, based on an election or, somebody feels differently that day. The third thing is, I don't know how many of you are military, but in the military there's an important part of how they set up called unity of command. Every person has one boss. Well, when I was the administrator in Moline, all of my power really came from the mayor. And the mayor talked to department heads just like I did. And so, the mayor could be telling a department head one thing, I could be telling him something else. Well, then what's the department supposed to do? It just creates confusion. And with the commission form, it's probably even worse because you really have 5 people who are bosses. And what if you come against an issue that requires cooperation between different departments in the organization that are under different commissioners, and you have an administrator on top of that. Now you have 3 people who can give either the same or conflicting orders. So one of the best examples in Champaign was we had a house that was a drug house, and a lot of illegal activity was occurring in it. It was a rental property. And the police department were spending tremendous resources. They were staking out, trying to figure out what's going on and how can we arrest these people. And they were devoting a lot of resources to this. Well, another part of the city was our neighborhood services department, which was responsible for property maintenance. So they happened to get a complaint about the house. They inspected the house. They found drug paraphernalia. They found all these other things. They contacted the landlord and said, this is going on in your property, and you're going to have a lot of damage, you're going to have a lot of problems, and so you probably ought to evict these people before they totally destroy your property. So the landlord issued eviction notices for all those people, and the drug problem at that location disappeared. Well, that was a different department than the police department. But as city manager, I could get both of those department heads in the same room and talk about how do we solve this problem together. So that's, it's not unusual to have issues come up that really span more than one department. It's great, if you have a situation that only one department is responsible for, but life really isn't like that, and so many of your issues anymore in communities are multi-department or multi-jurisdiction, so it's not just the city, but it could be the county or the health department or who else as well.
Yeah, and to your point of city population growth and how that changes, it's about complexity of government. What we see is under 5,000 population, generally a commission form or having a mayor council structure works. Usually it's the elected body. Once you hit that 5,000 to 10,000 threshold, the elected body, that's when they say, we need this council manager structure. And you see a huge shift toward wanting to adopt council manager because the elected body realizes, holy crap, there's a lot more here than we're capable of doing as a part-time job on top of my other job. And there's a lot of money from federal and state that we probably qualify for, but I don't have a clue how to apply and make sure we get that or how to document what we're doing to make sure we get reimbursed on stuff. So usually the elected body says this would be helpful in that sort of population growth. Once you hit 250,000, then they start to look at it from a political lens. How do we elevate the political candidates? And then so you'll have, like in Chicago, a mayor council form of government where the mayor can control everything so they have a stronger voice in the state, right? So you'll see that shift. But in that up to 250,000 and from about 5,000 up, council manager is by far the most common form because it is more accessible to the people. They can address the problems. They can hire someone to handle the issues that they are facing on an everyday that elected body generally cannot.
Sounds like it's just more efficient in that sense.
Correct. Yeah, if you look at efficiency, and this goes into, right? And let me say this too, it's really important to note. Any form of government can work or fail. It's the people in government that'll allow government to be successful or not, right? No matter what form. So the thing we look at ICMA is our goal is to be like, how do we manage administration of government effectively, efficiently, equitably? Like, what are the goals and outcome? What works? So we look at research. The reason that we advocate for council manager is because research shows that it's more effective in a lot of different ways, right? And so when we look at that, and again, a lot of text here for you that want to go through it, but one, if you have council manager and there's political and administrative powers is folks that become more bureaucratized. And this is what's interesting, right? Like sometimes I hear people and the argument is, why do I want some bureaucrat running government, right? This idea of a bureaucracy. Well, if you don't like bureaucrats, you don't like bureaucracy, then you want to actually have a council manager form of government because it reduces the amount of bureaucracy. Because if I'm doing this as a part-time job on top of campaigning and on top of doing all my politics, I don't have the chance to be able to make decisions. What do I need to do? I need to have committees, commissions, other groups to help set up and make these decisions for me that I don't have the time to do. City manager will say, okay, this is my full-time job. This is what I'm getting paid to do. Darn well better do it well. And so it actually reduces the bureaucracy by having a city manager. And again, this is based on research, not just theoretical, right? So then we look at council manager cities more likely to implement cost-saving strategies. Why? Because if I'm a city manager, almost every commission, council, that elected body inevitably is going to say, I'd like to cut taxes. I sure don't want to raise taxes. If we do raise taxes, we better be delivering really good programs and services for that raised taxes. So what does that force them to do every time? I need to find good cost savings measures that still allows the quality of programs and services we deliver, but allows us to be able to save money. So city managers far more likely to implement cost saving strategies than non-council manager structures. They're more likely to offer effective financial incentives for economic development. Right? If it's political, if it's economic, hey, you're my buddy, you've been helping me out on a campaign, I can give you a good economic development incentive to add a company here. That may or may not be to the greater benefit of the community, but it got that person there. Versus a city manager, they're going to have to look at it and say, how does this stabilize our community? How does it promote growth? If I'm giving $1 to you as a company, you better show me what I'm getting for that dollar in return in terms of jobs and investment. And economic development is always jobs and investment. How much are you investing in the community and how many jobs are you adding? And then based on that, is that worth this incentive that I'm giving you or not? That is always stronger in council manager structures. They have stronger budgetary solvency. So communities that have budget issues, council manager, again, you hire that person to make sure they know how to run a budget, that they know how to make sure they're giving good guidance to the commission. That commission now looks at how do we maintain long term. It's really easy to say, hey, we want to build a park, we want to build this road, we're just going to put money into it, we'll figure out how to pay for it later. I get elected on this thing getting done, I promise this to the constituent base, we'll figure it out. Well, if the revenues aren't there long term, you find yourself in a tough spot. City managers generally are going to look at a 5-year plan. They're usually going to say a budget, not only what does this cost you today, what is the outgoing cost? If we're going to incur debt services on this project, if it's a capital project, do we have the revenues to be able to fund that in the out years? What does that look like? What's our tax implication going to be not only now today, but in the out years there so that we make long-range plans toward it. So again, if you look at how do we maintain budget solvency, council managers better. They're more likely to utilize sophisticated revenue forecasting, expenditure analysis techniques, prepare multi-year budgets, emphasize the importance to the community. It functions more effectively when they look at it and compared to non-council manager cities, right? Other ones here, 57% less likely to have corruption convictions, right? So they looked at and said different forms of government, who's convicted of corruptions, how likely is it council manager is 57% less likely. And it's not to say that your government's corrupt or any other kind of form of government is going to be corrupt. That's not what that's saying. What it is to say are what are the opportunities and risks we want to take as a community, right? So if it is political, if you happen to have people who decide that they control the purse strings, they control their departments, another one doesn't have to worry about what's going on in my department. If I can hire my department heads in my departments and we want to then be able to hide what we're doing, now I have the capacity. So the opportunity is greater, not that anyone is just going to be by nature. You can have conviction, remember, it's 57% less likely. You can have convictions in any form of government for corruption. But the question is, what do we want to do to safeguard to make sure corruption doesn't have? Council manager performs better in that than non-council manager governments. They're more likely to make economic development decisions based on strategic plan guidance, so they're likely to have a long-range plan. What's the strategic plan say? That's what we're going to do from an economic development. So we say, what are the opportunities? What's the land that we have? What's the building? What's the commercial aspects that we have? How do we bring jobs and businesses and the types of opportunities that we want? Council manager is more likely to say, we need a strategic plan and know where we're going 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years out. Because a lot of these economic development projects are not just going to happen overnight. You need a long-term plan to be able to recognize what opportunities are there, to know which companies to go talk to and go after, because we believe we have a workforce that can be in those types of jobs. So again, they're more strategically focused. The political influence of a mayor on the appointment of a chief administrative officer has a negative influence on the financial outcomes of local government. So what you have right now shows in research, again, doesn't mean it's happening here, but if a mayor or elected body has undue influence on who gets to be hired, as opposed to council manager where they have to come to an agreement as a majority, and the mayor can be in the minority in that decision. right? So that council comes together. If 4 of the 5, and counting the mayor into that, say this is the person we should hire, that's who gets hired, even if the mayor's in the minority position on that. If the mayor gets to say, no, I want you all only to decide on the candidate that I bring to you, and some will do that, you bring me a candidate, just like they'll come through and they'll say, okay, we'll vote yay or nay on the candidate you provide. On those ones, the financial outcomes are always lower when they looked at it statistically. Not always, statistically lower as they go through, right? So again, if financial solvency matters, if making sure how we function matters, if our budget matters, council managers proven to be more effective. Those headed by a city manager are associated with increased bond ratings, right? So our bond rating determines how much we have to pay for the debt service we incur. If you have a capital project, the better my bond rating, the less I have to pay for that exact same project than another municipality would have to pay, right? Bond ratings are higher under council manager cities. And the last one is they tend to be equipped with a more advanced information system, which leads to improved efficiencies. Nobody wins an election saying our IT infrastructure is great. No one wins an election saying, I'm going to make your cybersecurity rock solid, right? City managers, if their cybersecurity isn't in place, if their information infrastructures aren't able for them to be efficient and get the job done, they're going to lose their job. That's something they have to consider and bring to the attention of the elected body. And so you'll see that they're more efficient in that way as well. So I threw a whole lot of research stuff at you, right? And these are all independent, peer-reviewed research journals that people are going through and conducting to say what form of government works. And so the question becomes not will good things happen or bad things happen. The question becomes what do you want out of your government and which form of government gives us the greatest likelihood that those outcomes can occur. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Any questions on that? Because I just do a whole bunch of stuff. Are any of these types of issues that you think of on government, or yeah, that's all well and good, but doesn't really affect us? Y'all are quiet. I talk too fast, probably, right? It's like, all right. So we go through so if any form can work or not, what do we see as the issues that come up of what communities debate? One is the administration and politics dichotomy. This idea of should the administration of government, the running and delivery of programs and services, should that be a job or should that be something we get elected into, right? And so it's a question we look at. If you believe that is a full-time job to run our city government, and that should be the focus of that individual, and that individual should not be concerned with the politics of getting elected, that is a policy decision that an elected body makes, and it's important to them to bring the vision, but we need someone to bring that vision to fruition, then that's the council manager structure. If you believe no, we want to have someone there that gets elected because I want to be able to vote them in or vote them out every 4 years. If they're not doing a good job, I want to wait 4 years and vote them out. That's a different structure, right? So that's sort of the idea of this dichotomy. And we all work together. I mean, just to be clear, it's not like there's obviously if I'm a city manager and I'm offered a recommendation, that's going to be used politically. So we don't pretend that those recommendations aren't used politically, or that we're not carrying out the will of the commission as we move forward in that.
I just say I worked for 5 different mayors, with 5 different mayors when I was in Champaign, and I still appreciate the sigh of relief when I talked to them as they were getting started that they didn't have to prepare the budget themselves, that they had staff to do that, because none of them were qualified to do that, and so they were just relieved.
Yeah.
So as city administrator in Moline, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's the same here, but here, right now, at the election, we could lose the entire council and the mayor in one fell swoop. Did you experience that in your time as administrator form of government, or was it staggered? In other words, from what I understand, in city manager, it's staggered so that you won't have a chance of losing the entire.
Right. Even though Moline was mayor council, the council terms were staggered, and in Champaign, they were staggered as well. And Champaign had a unique form. They changed it through referendum, where they have the mayor and 3 people were elected at large, and 5 were elected by districts. And so the district council members would be elected one election, and then 2 years later, the mayor and the 3 at-large people were elected. So we always had some stability on the council, even if everyone changed. Now, Urbana, with the mayor-council system, all of their aldermen were elected at the same time, and they had one election where the mayor and all aldermen changed.
Yeah, so how often do you see that? And in your expertise, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, having some experience on council holdover makes a huge difference, because I would tell my staff people when they get frustrated with new council members that, give them 6 months to a year, because the job of a council member changes week by week, month by month for 12 months, because you do a budget this year and you do this, different activities occur different times of the year, and so it takes a council member a full year really before they really understand the whole range of activities that they're responsible for.
Yeah, and you can have staggered terms or full terms under any form. What's your proposal?
Today, the problem is,
Today, all 5 of our council member and mayor can be voted off at the same time, and it's happened several times here. Under the managerial form, it's staggered, you have 3-2 every 4 years.
and I was just wondering, based on your expertise, it makes more sense to have the staggered terms.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
So the other issue that comes often is accountability. How do I hold a city manager accountable? That's a question I get a lot when they look at this council manager structure. And also by that rationale, how do we hold, in your current structure, the administrator accountable? Often we think accountability as a public means I can just go to the voting booth, and that's how I hold accountability. That's the lowest bar of accountability you can have, because it's once every 4 years, or when they come up for election, right? And you don't necessarily hold in the current structure, the administrator directly accountable through that vote. You wouldn't hold the manager directly accountable through that vote. The difference, though, in council manager is they are held accountable every single day by the people you elect to serve in the commission. So they can fire the city manager tomorrow. You don't need to so if there's something wrong in the community, something happens that was unexpected, all of a sudden is wrong, you don't have to sit and wait to get someone else elected in to hope that they hire someone different. You can show up to that commission meeting, have a group of people like any other policy issue, and say, we got a problem with how this program is delivered, and you can say, we have a concern with this. That commission then can get together and say, hey, look, this isn't working out. They can fire them if it's not working. So it's very different. The accountability is actually higher in terms of any single given day. As a city manager, I could be called in, have a conversation, and be told, I'm dismissed. You can either leave or we will fire you, right? You get all those kind of decisions come about, but that can happen 24/7, as opposed to having to wait for elections for that to occur. So there's a lot of power that people have through the representative democracy that they have of the people they voted onto that commission. The other one is separate and unified powers. This won't really change for you all, right? Like, you have unified powers. The executive and legislative function is in the commission. Under council manager, executive powers and legislative powers are in that commission. That does not change. What changes is the authority that's granted to the city manager to run the daily operation. The question of corruption comes up a lot. How to reduce that? I talked to you already on the research that shows how corruption is lower. How to reduce partisanship? We are in more hyper-partisan times now than ever. We used to be able to be Republican, Democrat, whatever. Let's figure out compromise, whatever policy positions. That's kind of gone. There's no real deliberation. So how do we reduce the partisanship of delivering programs and services, right? That should be nonpartisan. This is a program or service we offer. We got to be able to have that. It shouldn't be a political issue. So that comes up a lot, is how do we reduce that? Again, council manager, the city manager is not allowed to engage in the politics. They aren't allowed to be hired based on politics. They aren't allowed to engage in the politics. They can give information because they're asked for that. They can give recommendations if they're asked, but it's for that commission to go out and advocate for whatever policy outcome that they want to have. That's the way you reduce, at least in the administration, the partisanship. And then what about representation, right? This always comes up, how are we represented? The representation will remain through the commission. That member, that commission will hire as a majority the city manager. So those are often the issues that come up. I'm going to go through real quick. I just want to pause. How are we feeling? Are there questions that you all have that we've not really gotten to that you really want to make sure we touch on?
When you discuss accountability,
Can,
standpoint, how does that accountability as a managerial candidate get it leverage vertically down to make sure that they're getting what they need?
Yeah, so when we look at how do you hold one accountable, when you're elected and you run for elected, it is the vision that is established. We elect people based on their vision, right? The vision they have for the community, what they say they want to bring to the community. That sounds great. How do we make it happen, right? Campaigning is different than governing. So the campaign, this sounds great. How do we make that happen? And so if I have this great plan and vision for the community, and you're like, man, I really want to elect that person, I cast my ballot, that person's elected. Now I've got 4 years to see, did they make that happen? And I may be looking for that vision to come to fruition. But there's nothing that holds them accountable other than waiting to the next vote if it happened or not. The city manager says, okay, this is the vision that you as a commission have established for this community. I'm going to have a strategic plan and a process, and I'm going to report back to you on an annual basis how have we made progress. So the accountability is I need to demonstrate that we're moving toward that vision, and that commission at any point says, you know what, you have not moved the needle at all on these things we said were important. We think we got the wrong person for the job. We're going to dismiss you and find someone who can do this. So that accountability becomes much greater because the city manager has to demonstrate on an ongoing basis that they are moving the needle toward that vision. Whereas elected leaders, the vision can change, things can shift. As long as I figure out what's important today, that can sometimes move in different ways, and there's no necessary accountability toward the vision that I got elected on necessarily, right? Good commissions, good elections, they do. They make promises, they do it, and it all comes about. The question is, how do we make certain we can hold them accountable, right? And so it's always the question that I always raise is which gives us the best chance of that accountability. Does that answer? Does that address? Yeah. So the biggest thing here is understanding the mayor, the council, in this case the commission, and the manager, they have unique roles. Mayor is generally the voice, the spokesperson for the council in many ways. They're ceremonially, also they're out there. They're often a face of the council and the commission. The commission as a whole makes decisions on policies. The manager has to carry them out. The why and the what is the commission. The how is the city manager, right? And so it's making sure we separate it, because you can have all the greatest ideas in the world. If you don't know how to get there, it really doesn't matter. And then this here I think is important, power versus authority, right? I get this question a lot, like this, why are we going to have this unelected person with all this power? City manager has very little power, right? So I got a king versus a knight, right? The knight is there in service only to the king and can be removed by the king at any point in time. Right? It's the same sort of notion with the manager. The power, if we talk about as capacity to control government actions, the commission has that power on the executive and the legislative functions. The power rests and is not taken away at all from the commission. It rests with them. The authority, though, they grant authority to a city manager to say, this is what you can do. You can hire and fire department heads. You're going to recommend a budget. You don't have any power on what the budget will be, because thank you, we have that power. We are going to adopt the budget we want. If we don't like the recommendation, we can change that budget however we want to change it. Then we will provide you the budget that we have. Good structures, we actually have conversation, and that budget should be fairly well in line with the council because it's not done in a vacuum. But that authority is granted for them to make sure they carry those things out, right? Huge distinction. You are not granting power to some unelected official. The power is in the people that you elect to the commission. They grant certain authority to them. And again, they have the power because if they're not utilizing that authority as they wish, they get rid of them and they find someone that can. Does that make sense? I know it seems sort of theoretical nuance, but it's a huge distinction when we're a city manager.
Just an example, at one point, the News Gazette editorialized that the city manager had too much power because the city council was just a rubber stamp, because they approved all of the city manager's recommendations. And my response was, well, the city council is my boss. How stupid would I be if I keep bringing them things that they don't want?
Right.
You know, I mean, let's get common sense here involved. So as a city manager, yeah, if we're working on a proposal well, sure, there'd be discussions with individual council members. What are your concerns? How can we address those? So by the time it got to the council, their concerns were already addressed. It wasn't because I had so much power, it's because the council and I were actually talking.
Right. The other issue here is this code of ethics. So now again, not all city managers are ICMA members. They're not obligated to be ICMA members or ILCMA members. But if they are, then they have to abide by this code of ethics. And I'm not going to read through all these different things on the code. But the biggest issue of the code of ethics is, as a member of ICMA or ILCMA, you must abide by this. And we have a body that looks at it. It's our peers. They review, and so if someone feels that they violated this code of ethics, that gets reported. There's a group of peers that review that and say, is it a violation there? And there's all sorts of things that can happen based on that. But this idea that becomes really important, one of the biggest tenets of this is we need to maintain public trust. To maintain public trust, we cannot engage in the politics, right? If I engage in the politics, now people think I'm doing things simply for political will. I'm the deep state type of operator within local government, right? Like that's the issue that we have to avoid. And so to avoid that, we're transparent, we're honest, we make sure that we're not engaged in the politics, and we make sure that the actions we do are for the benefit of the community, not my own personal benefit, right? If I violate those types of codes, then there's things to me that my association can do as a professional, and that professional association matters, right? Those credentials that we have as managers matter.
Yeah.
But it's a really important aspect.
Really important because we live in Illinois, and Champaign may be 60 miles farther north than you are, but we don't want to be Chicago either, okay? And, we don't want, their way of operating to go beyond the borders of Chicago. They can keep that up there if they want to. That's kind of their issue. But, it was gratifying to me as a city manager during one of the governor's trials. People would stop me on the street and say, thank God I'm a citizen in Champaign because we have honest government. And you just can't put a price on that. So the code of ethics and hiring people that abide by that are really critical, I think, for just the reasons that Jason mentioned. Yeah.
So I work for the City of Mattoon. I can't say whether I'm in favor of this or against this. I really don't want to get that $5,000 fine from the state, right? That said, working at City Hall, you hear a ton of rumors around town. As a board president of a nonprofit, you hear a lot of rumors too. So this is really more so like a direct question to Kurt. Basically, some of the things that are going around that I've heard is like, oh, this group that's putting this on the ballot, they might just want to have a buddy of theirs get the city manager role, things like that. And so I guess my question, to give you all an opportunity to respond to those, is effectively, is anybody in this group that's, supporting the ballot initiative officially that got it on the ballot, are they interested in applying for the city manager?
Not in any way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
I personally have no desire to run for city council in any position. I can tell you that there's nobody in that pack that has any desire to do it. And I don't have any friends, one, and I don't have any friends, two, that were city managers that want that job. Okay? So there is no underlying undertone. It is absolutely our goal to advance Mattoon in managerial form to be more efficient, more effective, and serve the citizens better. That's it, period.
Awesome, thank you.
I will not even participate in that search.
Will be a search committee?
That's the hope. So we as citizens need to put pressure on the council when that time comes, that there be a search committee formed, and that search committee make the recommendation to the board.
So if this passes, does that mean that it will happen or it goes before something
It
else?
has to happen. It's a binding referendum.
It's a binding referendum.
It is. So in November it's voted on, and it has to be put in place by April, or at least planned to be by April.
Right.
Remember, the commissioners are voted in April, and so there may be a new commission, mayor and commission in the city when this happens. Holman, all five, could be the case. And again, the stagger point, I think, that Ed brought up is really important. And when you do city manager, then you have 32 on rotating for you on a daily basis. You keep some continuity on council, but they know what the history is.
So one rumor that I think I've heard is if you go to the manager, you don't want to do that because it's going to cost a lot more
perhaps that position may cost more, but you're going to have so many efficiencies, it won't be an obvious thing, then it will be better.
My opinion as well. So the city administrator position goes away. If you look at his salary compared to what a manager makes, there's about a $25,000 or $30,000 gap in that. If a city manager can't make that much efficiency gain, they're not doing the job, in my opinion.
Well, they won't be paying down to the council members also.
That
So
could
you take that in your perks, totally makes up for the space in between. So it makes common sense to,
Yeah, and what we see nationally, I can tell you that, I mean, two things. One of the question about how does it get appointed? Generally, most commissions they either do a search firm that runs that on their behalf because they don't necessarily want the department heads or the HR director trying to figure out who do they want their boss to be, right? It's kind of an awkward position, and it makes them feel like they have some sort of power over that city manager when they get hired. So generally there's a search firm type of group that goes out and says, okay, here's different city managers across the state, even nationally, that are interested in this. They gather those. They generally bring candidates to the commission, the finalists, and say, here's a list of finalists. And that commission may have citizen groups who looks at it. They may have public hearings to say, hey, we want the top 3 finalists to come speak at a public meeting. There's all different ways cities do this, but the commission the council hires that city manager by a majority decision. But there's lots of different ways that citizens can influence how they want that hiring process to go. Anywhere where it is, oh, I'm going to hire this person because we know them, there are places that have done that, and it always backfires on the elected officials and the manager. They're usually gone after the first cycle. Communities don't like that. And so it's rare that anyone's going to be like, oh, I'm just going to appoint my buddy into this system, because communities have the ability to re-elect and make sure that you hire. So they put a lot of pressure on that hiring process. Generally, nationally, that's what you'll see happening. So then when you look at the hiring of staff is different. So I always like to make sure people know, if we adopt this form of government, how does all this actually work, right? So the council, which is inclusive of the mayor, they hire the administrator / manager, right? So in this case, it'd be a city manager. And then that city manager hires the department heads. They hire them like we hire any other job. These are not at-will appointments. Generally, department heads and commissions are generally at-will. I'm not sure if they are here or not. Yeah, so generally under commission form, department heads are at-will to the commission, all the department heads. And a council manager, those department heads are hired based on their skill and ability to do the job, just like every other government employee. And then those department heads are responsible for hiring the staff underneath of them, right? So that direct relationship from the public to the council, council to the manager, manager to department heads to staff. One of the things, as someone I've worked 16 years in local government before coming to ICMA, the worst thing about when you have department heads that are appointed positions and you're a professional staff who doesn't weigh in on the political aspects, guess where my career is going to end? At best, I might become a deputy director, because I'm not political and I'm never going to get a political appointment, and I don't have enough money to work my way into the political appointments, right? You lose the best talent at the mid-level up to that point, because they'll go to a city where they can become a director and a department head and actually run an organization. Right? So if you want to make sure you keep good talent in your government, this is why the council manager structure works, because it's based on your professional qualifications, it's based on your merit, it's based on your ability to show that you know the job that you're doing, and when those opportunities come available in your organization, you're more likely to stay within that organization to do that job, because people who work in local government, they're public servants, they do it because they like giving to the community. The more opportunity you have to give that community to stay there, you're more likely to stay in those communities. So you'll see greater longevity in that structure. But that's sort of how the staffing works on there. The other thing is you also have one boss at the top, which is your city manager, and then you have your council that gets elected that sets the vision. If your department heads change, if they're political appointees as department heads, that is the worst thing as a staff member, to be like, every 4 years, my whole vision and mission and desire for my department could change. Particularly in a commission structure where if you get someone else who has that department, they decide we got a whole new vision. As a staff member, there's nothing worse than every 2, 3, 4 years, we're just moving, and you just sort of just wait for the next thing to come and you just get by. because you're not thinking ahead because it could all change. So the amount of effort you would put in toward projects wanes under commission forms generally because your direction is less there. The budget process, Steve talked about this a little bit. It's really important to understand city managers do not create the budget in the sense of just, here's everything I would want to do now here, right? They get the what they want and why they want it. They figure out how on a budget cycle. So when we talk about what's the cost going to be to a community, really easy for the council to say, hey, look, this is what we're paying you, but we expect you to find 5% efficiency across the board. I don't know how you do that, but you figure that out, because we're not going to raise taxes. So that puts pressure on me in the budget process to say, okay, where can I find efficiencies? How do I find these efficiencies? That may be streamlining services. It may be finding cost-saving measures. There may be programs and services like, gee, you've been doing this for this amount of years, but there's not really many people utilizing this service. Is this really a priority for you or not, right? There's those kind of questions that a manager brings. So at the end of the day, the fiscal impact of having a council manager rests in the power of the commission, the council, to adopt a budget. Because at the end of the day, you have to adopt a balanced budget. And so it's not like, well, if I add this, then it's just automatically 25% higher. It's not the way it works, right? We look at the entirety of a budget now. We don't look department by department, and you hold that manager accountable to say, this is what we expect you to do for the amount of money that we're going to be paying you. And usually that's a conversation we have in the interview process. You'll know, hey, look, we're coming on here. We want to make sure, we're looking for someone who knows how to make fiscal cuts and still make things work well if that's important to the community. That's usually a conversation in any interview process. Again, we've been in jobs like that, right? Like, this is what's expected of you. That manager will be like, okay, yeah, I can do that. We can sign it. They're going to look at your previous year budgets. It's all public. I can see every budget that's been adopted in there. They're going to look at it. They're going to be like, yep, that seems reasonable. I find a way to do it. They'll be like, that's impossible. They're going to walk away, right? So that power is in the budget. We've discussed all that. So these are the sort of the key questions that come up. So when people ask me, what's the difference between council manager and commission? What are the kinds of questions that sort of come up? One key question, are organizations, in this case the government, are they more successful with a chief executive officer responsible for directing staff, or multiple individuals offering potentially contrary direction, right? So if you look at this, my commission is one body, that council, they give the vision to the city manager. That city manager now has to make sure staff delivers. Under your commission form, each of them tells the city administrator what they want to do. They don't like what the city administrator wants to do. They may go down to the department head and say, hey, department head, this is what I want you to do, which may be different from what the administrator said. Now the administrator is like, holy crap, I guess we got to do this now instead, right? This is what can... I'm not saying it happens here, but it can happen in commission forms. We see a lot. So the question becomes, if we want an efficient organization, we want our government to work efficiently and effectively, which of these two seem to be more likely to generate that opportunity, right? And again, anything can go well or not, but we look at opportunities. Are organizations more successful with the chief executive officer accountable to the people on a daily basis, right? If you run your own business, if you're a CEO, if you're a boss, if you're overseeing folks, right? 24/7, 365, you are always accountable. And at any point you can be removed from your position if you're not doing the job, right? So is that more successful or not for an organization? Do you believe that we value executive officer with proven ability to run a city, right? So if you do, or not, but this is the question, right? Should the CEO, the person who's responsible for the daily operation of government, should they know what they're doing? Should they know how to run a government or not? And again, they can hire a good city manager, administrator that knows that currently, but they're not required to. So when we look at it, we say long-term vision for any city, would I rather say you have to hire someone who knows what they're doing, or we hope you hire someone who knows what you're doing? So from ICMA perspective, we say you're better off requiring it than hoping it, right? And again, because things could be great otherwise, but you want to make sure it's there long term. Should department heads be hired based on qualifications or political allegiance, right? Which one should it be? Do I want my department head running public works who knows how to run public works or not? Do I want someone who knows transportation, who knows how to get federal and state funding or not? Right? What is it that we want to see out of that? If you value that you should have qualifications, council manager requires that of department heads. Do organizations thrive with consistent and effective service or with limited ability to advance one's career? Right? So if I have an organization, any business we're in, any job we're in, we want to retain good talent. Now the bad talent, y'all go ahead, right? But good talent, we want to retain it. And you retain them by making sure that they're challenged, that they have a clear vision of where they're doing, and they have opportunity to grow in their career. Right? That's how you maintain that. So if you value that, then council manager works better. So that's what we've got. I don't know if you had anything else to add on top of that, Steve.
Well, Jason's really covered this stuff pretty well, I think. And the one other point that I might make that has kind of been included in a lot of the discussions in Illinois, if you have a council member or a commissioner that's not doing their job, you know, do you have some option other than just waiting till the next election? And this has been an interesting question in Illinois because in recent years there have been some city councils that have had a council member that was just over the top, out of control, and really making the whole life of the city council difficult and interfering with providing good work. We had a council member once that was on the negative vote she was the negative vote on every vote. Every vote was 8-1. And so the mayor got to announcing the decisions as, well, 8-1, another unanimous vote. But at some point then she just left. She never came back to another council meeting. And so the question came up, well, what can the council do about that? Because we only have 8 people and we should have 9. And so the attorneys did all the legal work and stuff like that and said, well, you'd have to prove that council member abandoned the office. And the council decided, well, there's no really legal basis for precedents or anything, so let's just go with 8 people. But there have been other cases where, you know, councils have tried to censure people, council member. We don't have a recall in Illinois for any elected official. And so if you have an elected official who is not doing their job or doing it inappropriately, what choice do you have? You don't have any choices. You wait until the next election. That's just the reality of the law in Illinois right now.
Any questions you all have? Anything that's been just bugging on you on it or figuring out, man, I'm not sure I really grasp this, or I'm not sure I feel comfortable about this, or in anything? We rocked it, Steve. Looks like we're good at this.
These guys went super deep. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
This form of commission has not been adopted in Illinois in over 60 years. And less than 3% of all cities in the U.S. our size have this form of city manager. So we need to get moving on.
Yeah, and I went back and looked over the past 25 years where I see ICMA's record where we work with cities on form of government changes. None have changed to commission form. They've only changed away from it, never to it. And at least in the last 25 years of cycle that I can find, it's probably further back than that.
I think Jason's talking about the power of the commissioners. That one little graph, I know it's tough to see, but you've got commissioners, you've got the city administrator, and you've got department heads. There's so much confusion that goes between those that is so inefficient. That needs to be fixed. And then we as citizens still have the power. We as citizens have the power. We are the ones that vote our council and mayor in, and we're the ones that need to keep pressure on them to do the right thing. That's what we're asking them to do. Any questions? Vote yes. Stick a sign in your yard. Tell all your friends. Call me if you have questions.